Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. And this week, we're back with a nostalgia. We have that twist back in our hands and we're going to get knee-deep into a historic story this week. It is the upcoming last weekend of the football calendar in Spanish football. There is one game of La Liga left, and it is the most incredible relegation battle you could think of, with only a few teams actually confirming their survival status in the last few days. Joining me as always is Paul. Paul is obviously a Mallorca fan as well. Paul, you are right in that relegation trouble at the moment in those final three spaces. It's a bit of a nerve-biting weekend ahead for you guys, isn't it?
Absolutely, it is. Yeah. In fact, depending on where you're listening to, if you're one of the cool kids listening to this on Patreon, then you're right on time, and we don't know the result yet. But if you're one of those still cool but slightly less cool, I mean, you listen to this podcast, so you've got something about you. If you're listening to this on the other platforms, then you'll already know whether or not I am going to be in a good mood or a bad mood. But yes, it's certainly one of the most interesting relegation battles I think we've had for a while, given it's pretty much up until the last weekend where it was anybody up to, was it 8th or 9th place? It was so far up the table, wasn't it? It was crazy. And we absolutely love it, don't we? That's what we're in for football for, the twists and the turns. Look, I might be wrong. And obviously, listeners will know when they're listening back to this, if you're on the non-Patreon feeds already, or if you're listening to this in the future. My personal opinion is I'm not feeling completely optimistic now. I think the damage has been done for Mallorca. I think perhaps they held on to Arrasate a little bit too long, and one or two of the more recent results on the Martin Divichia list have not brought the rewards that the team needed. But we don't talk about contemporary football very often, or we're not doing it on this week's show, are we? That was last week's.
Yes.
Yeah. So let's should we go back and talk about another relegation battle? Should we go back over 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is the hook, isn't it? Because one of the teams that Mallorca could possibly leapfrog or relegate in their place potentially is Elche Club de Football, who had such a fantastic start to the season, not so much a second half of a season to remember under Eder Sarabia, but ultimately they are just about surviving as we speak in La Liga. However, there once was a time, as you say, Paul, just over 10 years ago, when Elche survived comfortably in the Liga one season, but then in the same season were administratively relegated. A first of its kind, I would like to say, in terms of from the top tier, especially given the amount of money that is usually flushing around in La Liga. However, this was the new strict financial controls in La Liga enforced by Javier Tebas, basically coming into effect, and essentially, I'm probably right in saying, Elche being used as a bit of an example of, what is it? Fuck around and find out is probably the best way to describe it. Because they just did not adhere to the rules, did they? And they got the worst possible punishment.
I think that's fair to say, yeah. So should we talk about how they got there? I mean, it was their second season back in the top flight. So they got promoted in 2013, May 2013. Fran Escriba was the manager. He seems to have been around quite a long time, doesn't he, over the years with a number of clubs in La Liga. But back in 2013, he led Elche back to the Primera with quite some style as well. He broke a couple of records on the way. They were able to not only get promoted, but the first year back, they comfortably, they remained in the top flight. And that second season, which is the one we're going to talk about now, is where on the pitch they did more than their job. But it was not to be that in terms of the next season they would find themselves back in the second tier. So where should we start, Nick?
Well, I'd like to start with by complimenting Elche for one, not for only being, a fantastic club, and we are a fan of sort of like these smaller provincial clubs that punch well above the weight, and I definitely would put Elche in that category. They are possibly the second or third biggest club in their region. Now, obviously, they've got massive rivalries with Ramurcia and Hercules of Alicante.
Mm-hmm.
However, they were a World Cup hosting stadium back in 1982 as well, the Estadio Martin Valero, one of those really impressive sort of like bowl stadiums. And if I could recommend anyone, if you're based in the UK, the Alicante flights or the Benidorm bus, as they're called, can get you to that part of the world, and it's not too far away from Alicante Airport to get to Elche. It is definitely worth the trip to go and soak up the atmosphere there. But they're a club that always continue to sort of like punch above their weight, really, aren't they, Paul? Like you say, they're in a competitive part of the world. They don't have loads of money sloshing around, but even this season, and obviously past seasons, we've seen them in La Liga. They tend to be quite box office at times. They've got some notable scalps in there. They've had some brilliant players, and they've also had some beautiful kits. I absolutely love the white with the green stripe going across the middle. It's quite iconic, isn't it?
Oh, it absolutely is, yeah. And you know what? I've got an Elche shirt. I should perhaps have brought it out and put it behind me as a great backdrop. But then again, that would mean covering up the bookshelf, which I believe is very popular with people on social media and
famous.
People,
famous
yeah,
now,
it's becoming quite famous, my bookshelf, by the sounds of things. And yeah, I have said, Evan, at some point I will do a Patreon exclusive. I'll walk everybody through the various books that are on that shelf and maybe do a little tour of it. But it is, yeah.
I'd like to see you sat in like a leather chair with a smoking jacket on, just sort of like pulling thick books off the shelf. That'd be quite a good feature, to be fair. And
well, yeah, if we get a few more subscribers, I'll be able to afford a leather chair, I think.
Yeah.
No, well, we're a long way off that. I've seen the price of leather chairs.
Not cheap. Not cheap.
No. Back on topic. Yeah, iconic kit. I would like to echo as well what you said there about the stadium was a World Cup stadium, obviously, as you mentioned. I believe it was the stadium outside which the comedian Bob Mortimer made a bit of a job cutting hair for England fans in exchange for egg sandwiches during the 1982 World Cup, which if anybody's seen him tell that story on Would I Lie to You, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah. It is a absolute sun trap as well. It's definitely one of those stadiums where you need to wear a big hat or put extra layers of sun cream on. And they're a club who have always brought a bit of character about them, haven't they? I remember a few years back as well when they were promoted with, was it Pacheta, I think was the manager at the time. And that squad, they were in the playoffs, and they just had this sort of resilience to them. And I always think of Elche as kind of a team that they've obviously gone through a fair number of managers, and the style does evolve a little bit. But there's always kind of been this sort of a large amount of fight in the dog, so to speak. When the backs are against the wall, and they seem to be that sort of club. And I'm aware there's a fair number of I want to say expats, but I'm not sure if all of them are. There's definitely a fair number of British and Irish people on Twitter that follow me who are Elche supporters. Actually, I seem to have accumulated over the years. I think going back to the days when I used to write about Spanish football more regularly. So they are a club who have certainly they've got something about them.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that, and I also sort of echo what you say there about their the way that the managers change. But I think with Elche, you also find that there is a commitment, and I suppose the comparison I would make is, when they speak about the West Ham way. You can never
Yes.
really truly define what the West Ham way is, but it's a way that the fans obviously want to see them play, regardless of who's in charge. I always find that Elche have a bit of that about them, which is why I think initially, last season when Eder Rabia came in, given the fact that, he'd kind of gone a little bit backwards with Andorra, but he seemed to obviously get this really plum job with Elche. It was more about what he can do when he gets it right and when he gets the players right. And obviously they've managed to achieve that with promotion last season. Like I say, they took the beginning of this season by storm as well. It's obviously a shame that they find themselves in this position. But to go back to 2015, as we've just mentioned, they did survive quite comfortably, just 6 points above the relegation zone. But in La Liga terms, that's a 4-mile finish, isn't it? So they survive on this, essentially sporting merit. They are, talking about how brilliant it's been, how brilliant the atmosphere that Martin Valero has been, and again, similar to some of the other clubs that we've seen in the league, they've survived against the odds, really, which is really quite good, because this is the era of domination where you've got Brazil, Barcelona and Real Madrid, Lionel Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, in your peak, sort of like mid 2010s La Liga football. This is where Elche and I think, like say, where Spanish football was starting to lose itself a bit, because the gaps were getting so big in between the haves and the have-nots, that a lot of clubs were starting to essentially put themselves in danger with the amount of gambling they were doing with their futures, and Elche were one of them. There's a story that season where you've got players going unpaid for a couple of months, and the squad were cancelling all non-playing commercial commitments because they weren't being paid. So they'll just say, right, we're going to do the football on the pitch, but we're not going to be doing the conferences afterwards, or the guest appearances, or Kelme adverts, whatever they might well have been. So again, you start to see this bubbling of trouble for Elche well in advance of how it actually happened. Because do you think that is because people were trying to play catch up, or do you think it was just, we need to chuck money at it in order to survive, because we need to be in this league in order to keep the cash? Because the disparity between the two leagues at the top of Spanish football is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think as well, it's fair to say, Elche have not really always been one of those clubs that have a large financial base with which they can draw upon, and this was a team who, arguably, for the results on the pitch, right the way from the promotion campaign and the way that they stormed back to La Liga, and the style of football they play, and obviously the 13th place finish on the pitch in 2015, they were punching above their weight. If you look purely at the financials in terms of what the wage bill was versus other clubs around them, and clubs in the peer group. But I would say that this situation they were in, it wasn't simply a case of just having debt. It wasn't just a case of having debt, and that's de facto why this became an issue. It was, and without sort of going off on yet another tangent, there's always been this perception within football, or I'd say no, probably over the last 15 to 20 years, there's this perception in football that a football club in debt is a football club in trouble. Now, I'm no Kieran Maguire, and I'm not going to pretend to be, but and I'd love to get him on to talk us through some Spanish football financial stuff actually at some point. So we do need to reach out to Kieran. From the point of view of Elche back in 2015, it's not just a case of having debt. It's not having the ability to service that debt, and that is the same, cliched phrase that you could say about any football club. So Manchester United, for example, have, they're one of the largest football brands in the world, obviously. They have owners with significant personal wealth, but they also have I can't remember, it might be £600 million worth of debt. But Manchester United are able to service that debt in a way, Or I know that some people will be shouting at this, going, "It's not United that have got the debt; it's the owners that have got the debt." Either way, there is a debt there which is being serviced. So you are servicing it by paying down towards it and contributing. The same way, if you have a personal debt to a bank or a credit provider, you might make your minimum payments to keep the interest at a minimum, or you may enter into some sort of agreed payment plan where it'll be a pay down initiative that's agreed between the parties. So Elche were in a position where it wasn't just that they had debt, they had a problem servicing that debt. And one of the key things that sort of triggers this decision to take a strong stance against the club and to sanction them in a way that impacts them in a sporting sense as much as a commercial sense was the fact that Elche were carrying debt that was unresolved and not adequately guaranteed, as it was not even in an agreement to be deferred with the tax authorities. So in Spain, it's the AETA. Is that the right order that the initials are in? Yeah. So it's a case of that there wasn't an agreed deferral with that. So that means that in La Liga's eyes, or in the view of Tebas, and let's just probably add a bit more context to say that this was a time where La Liga was really trying to, through Javier Tebas, they were trying to show a suitable level of reform in terms of cleaning up the financial structure. We're in a period where state clubs have obviously disrupted the European scene. Football in Spain has gone through its quite difficult conversation around television rights. So was it about 2012 where the decision was taken where clubs were no longer allowed to make their own independent television deals? So obviously I think it was Barcelona used to have the was it TV Tres, the yellow square with and I can't remember who Real Madrid had a deal with, but obviously those two clubs used to eat up all of the pie, so to speak, and it would leave just
a little bit for everybody else, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So at this point in time, Javier Tebas and La Liga are really trying to change the narrative around that and provide some level of security for clubs in Spain, which obviously leads us on to where we are now with like recent years with Barcelona and all these other not quite, we won't necessarily talk about the Palencas on this show, but the conversations that they had when the Palencas were activated, and it was we've spoke to La Liga and we're allowed to spend this because they've ran it through the computer and the computer says yes for this, but it says no for that. This is still, we're talking 10 years ago, so it's before we've got into that sort of evolved state, and there was obviously a requirement to take a strong stance. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think if you take like the really wide angle point of view, obviously at this point in time, or when a lot of this is happening, we're just out of the 2008 financial crash, obviously, which not just shocked football but shocked world and global markets, and put a lot of countries into recession. So everyone had to sort of tighten the belts. Anyway, we look at as you've mentioned, the introduction of petrostates and such like that, and really wealthy oligarch owners coming in and being able to spend millions without any kind of authority, and FFP being introduced rather haphazardly to begin with. And also these financial controls that Javier Tebas wanted to input, those were factors for it. But ultimately, we'd seen so many teams suffer from financial irregularities and spending way beyond their means. We only have to look at what happened to Real Oviedo, Real Racing Club de Santander, Reus, Real Murcia. So many examples of clubs where they whether they were administratively relegated as well, or whether they just ceased to exist because they'd spent well beyond their means and effectively went bankrupt and liquidated. That's what Tebas just wanted to get a grip of. He said we needed to get the financial controls on this in order to stop this from happening. And I think that was the innocent plan at the beginning, and it has spiraled slightly. And one thing, you'll always have to give Javier Tebas credit for is, the financial footing he's put Spanish football clubs on in terms of solidity is paramount, next, the best
Yeah,
thing on the planet.
I
Like you
think
say,
I think that's
debt.
indisputable. Really, is the
Mm,
job, irrespective of what your personal opinions might be of Javier Tebas. I know he's a very unique character, very divisive. I think one of the things that people pretty much across the board can agree on is that the introduction of tighter financial controls in La Liga, that his time in the presidency has brought about, you could argue has saved Spanish football. It's
mm,
certainly helped it grow. I mean, there's definitely more that could be done in terms of trying to expand La Liga's reach, and some people will say that it will criticize other elements within the presidency, and those criticisms are absolutely valid. But I think
mm,
we should all be able to agree that the financial controls in La Liga are some of the best financial controls in terms of preserving the number of clubs,
mm,
than any of the other leagues in Europe. And and I'm somebody who can say that, who was, I was very close to the situation with CF Reus, and there's lots that one day I promise you we will do a full show on when
expose.
yeah, when some of the dust has settled and there's not some ongoing unresolved grievances, which
Mm,
I don't want to be drawn into. I've only got information that was provided to me by the owner of the club, and some of the information and opinions that he shared with me back when I was interviewing him 4 or 5 times during the period of 2019 to 2021. Are his personal opinions, and I can only take them at face value. So, and I don't want to be drawn in any way,
mm,
shape, or form to any of the um, ongoing disputes.
mm,
So back on topic. Yeah, the context is that this is a time where La Liga is seriously looking to get a grip of financials. It's trying to combat state ownership. It's trying to preserve the integrity of its game, but it's also trying to look
mm,
strong. Tabas is trying to display this, this image of, we are the authority, and our rules are non-negotiable. And
mm,
it's worth adding to that prior to the 2015 season ending, in which, as we're explaining, it results in Elche's administrative relegation. The club had been warned the season before
yeah, yeah.
and sanctioned, and it hadn't appeared to have taken heed of those warnings. The club president, Juan Anguich, I hope I pronounced that right. I am terrible with pronunciation, so I do apologize. I think he was trying to at the time he was trying to suggest that the financial issues were the result of the previous administration that had been running the club, and that
Mm,
the ignoring of warnings was not malicious or anything, and it was more he felt that his club would was suffering as a result of
mm.
some of the previous issues. I mean,
Well, you
yeah,
look at sort of like the figures that were being mentioned there, Paul. Like say, you've already mentioned the tax that was owed to the AEAT stood at 4.3 million euros. Debt to unpaid players 7.8 million euros. Total
mhm,
debts across the club being at 38 million, which when you think for a club of Elche Science is absolutely incredible.
yeah,
In terms of like how like I say, not in trouble they were, but the fact they couldn't service that being the actual main issue. The best part of 30 clubs going through insolvency and proceedings over that time, it showed that the system was, generally truly broken. And that's the bit where Tebas, really stood behind Inter. He said, I'm doing this because I want, clubs to be better. I want there to be fair competition. I want to, be against the clubs that are basically can no longer compete, with all these debts that they've got. So it was, a real question of was this an essential reform to fix a broken system, or was it, sort of bureaucratic cruelty to say, like we've seen with, whatever your opinion on the Southampton Spygate thing this week, a rule has just come into effect. It's the first time it's been tested. You will get the book thrown at you. Like I say, there's no two ways about it, is there?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's worth mentioning at this point as well, in addition to that where you've got Elche, being sanctioned in such severe terms here. Conversely, the club that is the benefactor of this administrative relegation is Eibar, and Eibar, were at the time and largely still are held up as being, one of the clubs that it is I think it's a role model is the right word, but one of the ideal clubs for sustainability, given it's a small municipal club. I mean, it's one that everybody's got a soft spot for, and because of the story,
absolutely.
and I include ourselves about it, not least because of the way that they turn players into fantastic players. As we've covered in the past with David Silva and we did we do Alonso, or have we not released that episode
Alonso,
yet? We did release that one, didn't we? Yeah. And various other players. So it's you've got on the one hand Elche being shown by La Liga to have been one of the first to breach their, or to step out of line at a point where La Liga is trying to prove a point, and the benefactor, ironically, is one of the clubs that is seen as one of the, certainly of the time, one of the most financially sustainable and well run in Spain of that era.
Yeah, and there is an irony here as well, because once upon a time, it was deemed that Eibar wasn't able to compete in a Liga or be part of the Liga because they didn't, they didn't really resonate with the financial rules that were in play at that time either, which I think, if I remember rightly, they had that Defend Eibar campaign, which was backed by the aforementioned Xabi Alonso, trying to raise something like 1.7 million euros of capital in order to actually play in the bloody league. So it is that sort of,
and ironically, that was probably only 18 months or so earlier, 2 years earlier.
Yeah, crazy, isn't it?
18 months, because it was such a crazy time of shifting sands. By the way, if anybody wants a really good book on Eibar's rise up there, then Ewan McTeer's Eibar the Brave is one I'd highly recommend. It's one of the ones on the bookshelf behind me.
There's a new trick you can do on StreamYard here as well. Clip that. That means that it'll automatically clip it for us, and we can share that with you, and we can promote his book for him as well, and then get him onto the podcast. Yeah. There we go.
There we are.
The power of AI.
Now we know that then. So yeah, you're right. There is an irony to it. There's something more to this story, which I think is one of the things about Spanish football is, like, there's always a butterfly effect, and it's such a rich tapestry of sport. There's 20 clubs in the top flight, and yet they've all got unique stories to them. But what happens over the course of the season, one thing it affects the other. Anyway, less of the philosophy and more of the whats and whys.
Well, you get this. It's obviously, Tebas using this new, and let's not forget here, this is Tebas within his first 2 years of his presidency or his directorship. I'm not too sure what it is classed as by the Liga, but it's clearly you've broken the rules, you're a repeat offender. It's happening. They do appeal the decision to Elche, and they basically argue that the debts would soon be paid. Also pointed the finger at a plethora of other clubs as well who had this exact same issue. They demanded to see the tax authorities' receipts to say, like, actually prove to us what it is we even owe. They were refused. So there's a lot of cloak and dagger stuff that goes alongside this, which is peak Spanish football as well.
there
By the
is.
way, it turns into I can't. It's like a novella, isn't it, as they call it in Spanish dramas. So you imagine
Yeah.
there's people walking into rooms with shocked faces and "Mio mio" type thing. But
And you
essentially,
know, there's another parallel with Southampton. You know, obviously Southampton have said, yeah, well, we did do the spying, but you know, we didn't think it was that bad. I think it was one of the comments from the Elche president at the time was, yeah, we are guilty institutionally, but not personally. You know, it's like we've done something wrong, but it wasn't our ownership. You know, it's like, well,
it was the other guys.
yeah.
But
So
it does send, obviously this appeal fails because with Tebas, he is quintessentially a strong man, so he definitely wasn't going to yield on one of his first major decisions. The relegation stands. Elche drop into the Spanish Segunda, which, like you say, in normal circumstances, isn't unusual for Elche. But like I say, if you're struggling to service debt on the Liga, money already, dropping down to Spanish Segunda is going to make it even more difficult to do so. We then get this crisis, which is triggered where you've got players departing, a huge financial restructuring, you've got a lot of instability, fan protests, and essentially a bit of a long-term sporting decline, don't we, Paul? Because, the story here is that it isn't just a relegation administratively from La Liga, it's then an actual relegation from the Spanish Segunda into the third tier, the Segunda B, at which, isn't the Primera Federación that we know now. It's a much more difficult 5-league El Pozo, climb out if you can type attritional league that was sitting below the two La Liga tiers, wasn't it?
absolutely, it was. Yeah. So it's they relegated to Segunda. They finished 11th first season, and then because of all of the upheaval that's caused on the back of this, as you mentioned, with departures and stuff, they finished 21st the season after, and are right back down to the third tier. And that's the significant impact, and it does take it takes some doing to climb back out, but credits where it's due. They bounce back first time of asking 2018 it is, isn't it, back to Segunda, and it's two seasons in Segunda and back into La Liga 2020-2021 season. So
the COVID years, wasn't it?
Yeah, remember them? Yeah, as I mentioned before, it was the playoff promotion was as lockdown had hit, wasn't it? It was one of the delayed games. In fact, was this one of the games the same season as the Fuenlabrada 20 minutes postponed, or the
it might be
the same season?
Spanish football went through a weird thing through COVID, didn't it? Where basically they ended the previous season and then started the next season pretty much instantly, didn't they? Because if I remember rightly, they were one of the last countries to sort of get their football calendar back on track. That's where we had the double Copa del Rey finals that Athletic Club lost as well, didn't we? When everyone was trying to play catch up with themselves, and I think this is where Elche, I think, had got themselves into a position to be promoted. Had to see out then the rest of the season be behind closed doors, and obviously try to keep that momentum. And again, I very vividly try to recall whether it was actually a bit touch and go for a while. I think, if I remember rightly, their form dropped off massively, and there was a chance that they might not have made it. But then obviously they get into La Liga. They spend a few seasons up there. They drop down a couple of seasons later back into the Spanish Segunda, and effectively become a bit of a yo-yo club. But I suppose the lesson learned here is that Elche as an entity, Elche as a club, the one that we see now on the football pitch, which have some pretty decent players within their squad, are a much more efficient and well-run club compared to what the one that they had before. And I suppose, despite the pain that they went through, I think if you used to ask any Elche fan, you'd probably say, well, actually, we needed to go through that in order to reset, rebuild, and have the club that we have now, which, seems to be enjoying the fruits of that labour.
I think that's fair, yeah. And I think it's it's a recycle, isn't it? But they're I'll be using cliches again here and buzzwords, but they effectively have reset themselves, and the club does seem, certainly from the outside in, now to be on a much more firmer footing, I guess. I mean, obviously, we're saying that, as we mentioned at the start of the show, where they are very much in the relegation battle this season, and for the majority of people listening, I would imagine that you already know the outcome to that, and it could be that what I've just said there makes me sound very silly now, but it does feel like institutionally they're in a much better place than they were. But it has been a long road back for them, and I think it, just talking back then about the that playoff push and that 2020 COVID restart to football. I had the telly on quite a lot during that because there wasn't much else you could do, and I had 24/7 pretty much of La Liga TV with watching. Semra Hunter used to present the midweek evening shows, didn't she? And it was a great panel guest from Graham to Guillaume and Sid. I can still hear the tune to La Liga
Good
TV in my
times.
head.
Good
It
times.
was good times, wasn't it? I miss La Liga TV now, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and that's where we'll absolutely slate Tebas now, for as much as his strong financial allegations, getting this scaling back of televisual rights and content production for La Liga, absolute, as far as I'm concerned, because it is just you can't feel as connected to the product as we did back then. Like you say, even during that period of time, it felt like you were there and you'd be able to dial in and touch it. Now, I think more than anything, which is why we've probably seen this huge surge. I don't know if you've seen this on social media, Paul. There's so many accounts now that are talking about Spanish football I think to basically fill that void.
We're reclaiming it,
I
think, aren't we? Yeah, obviously
Yeah,
there's ourselves and there's other accounts out there as well. But yeah, it does feel like, because as fans of Spanish football, we've had in the English speaking world, I can only really speak from our perspective. We've had Revista de la Liga taken away from us by Sky, which was such a much loved show, and then we had La Liga TV, which has now been taken away from us. I hope that our show El Partido does help people in terms of, it gives you something, because we just love Spanish football and we do miss those days, but we also know sometimes we've got to get with the times. But I fundamentally disagree with the decision to have done away with La Liga TV, and it is nice though that you can still hear some of the commentators, and obviously some of them have got their own projects now, which I'd absolutely would support, and I do listen to others when I get the chance. But yeah, it feels like we had a really good thing going back then during this time where there was a connection. I mean, there was they used to do the competitions, didn't they? Where you could win a shirt or a match ball. Or you could send in a video clip and they'd play that on the TV of you talking about your club, and those days are gone, really, I think, aren't they? And we're friends with a lot of people that used to work for La Liga TV, and I know that they miss working there and the days. And obviously, we unfortunately we don't have Simon Hanley with us anymore, but he was such a driving force for La Liga TV back in the good old days as well. But
yeah,
that's an episode in itself, is La Liga TV, isn't it?
We'll
probably in like 5-10 years time when it's actually classed as nostalgia. So
no, definitely. So, and I think to bring it back to Elche here, and again take that wide angle view. We've spoken about this being the example that was made, but essentially was the death knell of old Spanish football economics. It allowed clubs to be much more financially regulated, which means they can only spend a certain amount of their expenditure as dictated by La Liga as well. Let's not forget. Mm-hmm. So again, you see the instances and cases of Sevilla recently we've been talking about, where they've only had €600,000 to spend on player recruitment and wages and such like that, in comparison to, other clubs, what they can do. And And we've already mentioned as well some of the other, it's a good model. It's not perfect, I think, is the thing we need to stress here, because as much
Yeah.
as, Elche have managed to turn it around, there are a few clubs that, are still going through their troubles. Obviously, we've seen Racing Santander come back from those troubles and obviously be promoted to La Liga last weekend. But you look at the situation at Malaga, the club I support, in in purgatory essentially at the moment in terms of what they can do, because the financial powers that been, the courts have obviously taken their ownership off the owner to an extent, but he still technically owns the club, so they can't actually do anything until he sells it. So it's broken that way, and you'd like to think if there were these strict financial and these rules that Tebas can do to relegate a club administratively, you'd like to think that there'd be something to be able to remove owners who aren't committed to the club moving forward. Same could be said with Peter Lim at Valencia as well. Obviously, there is a huge swell of, what could have been as far as Peter Lim's Valencia is concerned, but obviously all the concerns about, how he is neglecting the club. You could say the same about Presa at Rayo Vallecano. Again, despite the fact, that they continue to be successful on the pitch, reaching a European final, what he does off the pitch is also, like I say, should be subject to some kind of rules and regulations which appear to pass Tebas by. So I think, in another breath, you could also say, well, should Elche feel, a bit victimized by the fact that they were the book that the club that the book was thrown at, yet all these other clubs, despite the fact having their own problems, aren't necessarily getting either A, the support, or B, the punishment that they require.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's important. Just thinking back to the earlier part of the show where we were talking about how you've got to give Tebas some credit. Maybe I didn't offer enough balance there, because as you're right, there is plenty of issues, and I should know, because this is only 4 years before what happened to Cifuentes, and they were another club that arguably feel like they were made an example of, for a slightly different reason, which for the sake of litigation, we won't get into here. But they do feel that they were victimized and deliberately singled out for political reasons, I guess would be what we would say on that. And there's been plenty since then, as you say, but this one, it stands out. What stands out for us with Elche in this regard is this is really sort of the first time we see the strongman pose in the financial sense that has such drastic consequences for a club, and for it to be in the top flight as well. And it is quite a unique occurrence across any level of football nowadays, actually, if you think about it, with the exception of the English Championship, where it seems to be every season you've got a club there that's starting on minus something points and everything. But certainly to have a team that is administratively relegated. I mean, I know that there's probably some people going, Paul, aren't you a City fan? Are they not going to be relegated if there's 115 charges? Well,
I didn't want to
who
ask
knows? Who knows if City are even found guilty? We don't know. And this isn't about English football, so
we don't know. But effectively, Elche become the cautionary tale, don't they?
They do.
Become, it only takes one bad season off the pitch to completely unravel all the years of good work and hard work that they did to get to where they were, including, like, say, that 13th place finish, which, could easily be a platform onto bigger and better things and potentially assault on Europe or something like that. Who knows? It will always remain a who knows from this one. And it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend, Paul. Like I say, if you listen to this on the Patreon, you'll probably be catching it ahead of Saturday evening's game. So it'll be interesting to see who survives. I hope for your sake, Paul, that Mallorca maybe do. However, if they don't, whether you drop down and Malaga stay down, we can have some Segunda rivalry next year. But I'd much prefer Malaga to get promoted in the playoffs and Mallorca survive in the Liga, so we can have some El Partido rivalry in the top division next season. That'd be a treat
That's
for
the
us
dream.
all.
That's the
That
dream.
is definitely a dream. That is definitely the dream. And obviously for Elche as well, I believe there is a situation where Elche and Mallorca can survive. So if we can wish them both the best, then let's go for it. But it's an interesting story, and like I say, it is the acorn into which the wider picture of Spanish football's financial management has grown, and where you start to see it twist into different and weird ways at the moment, i.e., Super Coppers in Saudi Arabia, league games being played in Florida. Like say, this is kind of where it starts, and that is kind of where it's ended up going. So again, you've got this punishment that has led to the mad ideas of how do we keep La Liga financially stable for as long as possible in the face of the absolute behemoth that is the Premier League, for example. But very interesting story, and one I'm glad that you brought to us as well, Paul. I have to thank you for this one, because again, it was something that I wasn't massively aware of. It was a really fun subject to really dig into and to research ahead of this episode. So I tip my hat to you.
Oh, cheers, Nick. That's very kind. Very generous of you to mate. We're a joint effort. We're a team. And we've got plenty more ideas, haven't we? So hopefully people stick around and keep an eye out for whichever the next show is. I lose track now of which order we've recorded and released them, but
there's so many to come out still. If you're looking that far ahead to Monday as well, if you listen to Patreon, obviously you would listen to Paul's brilliant El Partido stories on Unai Emery, who is now a 5-time Europa League winner as well. But it all started, it started at Lorca Deportivo, but then his big break came at Ude Almeria, which is a story that Paul reminded us of last week. And then as we barrel towards the end of the season, we've still got some great episodes still to come. We've got Rob Potts coming on to talk about his new book. We have Martin de Cruz potentially coming on to talk about his Uruguay book as well. And I think we're also planning, just because it is a World Cup starting in less than 4 weeks, a special 1982 World Cup episode, which obviously happened in Spain. So plenty more to look forward to. Paul, thank you so much for joining me once again for this episode.
Thanks for having me, Nick. It's always a pleasure. Love speaking football with you.
Definitely. I shall see you this time next week. And gracias, amigos, to you guys as well. Your support is always appreciated. Please go give us a follow on social media. Give us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. Or if you watch on YouTube, give us a subscribe there. It always helps to spread the word about this podcast as well. But for now, I'll say thank you very much and hasta luego.